I want you to picture this ritual I used to perform. It was almost religious.
Oh, I think I know where this is going.
You probably do. I'd clear my whole desk, light this one specific cedar wood candle, crack open a fresh, always inexpensive notebook.
Of course, the tools have to be perfect.
Exactly. And I'd put on some curated deep focus playlist, and I would just sit there, pen hovering, literally waiting for this divine spark. I was completely convinced that because I'd set the perfect stage, the art would just flow through me.
And did it?
Not a chance. Nothing happened. The candle just burned down. The music looped and looped. I just stared at that blank page until the white space itself started to feel, aggressive.
Right, the pressure of the pristine page.
Totally. So I ended up doom scrolling on my phone for 2 hours, blew out the candle, and went to bed feeling like a total fraud.
I know that feeling.
Then you compare that to the very next morning. The vibe was the complete opposite. I was groggy, I was running on lukewarm coffee, and I had a hard stop in 45 minutes. No romance, no mood lighting, just pure panic.
The best motivator.
Right. I forced myself to type, literally tell myself, just write garbage. It doesn't matter. Just get it done.
Right.
I wasn't inspired. I was just grinding. And here's the irony that changed everything for me. Those 45 minutes of just ugly, rushed, mechanical work, they produced the backbone of my best performing project of the entire year. And that gap, that huge gap between the romanticized failure of waiting for inspiration and the ugly effectiveness of just showing up, it exposes this massive lie we tell ourselves about how creativity actually works.
It really does.
That whole experience, that frustration, it just speaks directly to the first big idea we have to tackle today, this great lie that separates creativity from routine. We've been sold this myth that creation is exceptional, it's rare, it's spontaneous.
The lightning bolt.
The lightning bolt, exactly. And our mission in this deep dive is to unpack all the research that proves the exact opposite. That the foundation of high-level creative achievement is ugly, it's disciplined, and it's habitual.
It's the battle between that divine spark and the mundane treadmill.
Yeah.
And it's a battle that people have been wrestling with for millennia. Long before we even had a formal word for creativity.
So what's the formal definition now? When academics talk about it, what are they actually saying?
Well, if you look at the scholarly consensus today, especially in psychology, the definition is way more grounded than that romantic idea. Researchers like Michael Mumford, Robert Sternberg, they pretty much agree that creativity is about producing something that is, one, novel.
It has to be new.
It has to be new, right? And two, it has to be useful or worthwhile. It needs to serve some function or solve a problem or just have some kind of value.
Okay, so that right there is huge. It isn't just about generating bizarre concepts. It's about generating bizarre concepts that work. That alone should reframe how most people think about their jobs.
It's a fundamental shift. And this is where we need to make a really crucial distinction that gets missed all the time, especially when you hear people talking about, creative industries or innovation strategy.
Which is?
The difference between creativity and innovation. They are not the same thing.
Go on.
Creativity is the process of generating those new and useful ideas. It's the brainstorming, the concept phase.
And innovation is the hard part. The follow-through.
Precisely. Innovation is the implementation of those ideas.
Yeah.
It's turning them into tangible outcomes that have a real application. I mean, you could have a brilliant idea for a new app feature, but until it's actually coded, tested, debugged, and shipped to users.
Just an idea. It's inert.
It's just a creative idea. Creativity without implementation doesn't really go anywhere.
But why did we ever create this huge mental gap? I mean, as a species, where did this idea come from that humans can't just create something new? Why did we resist that?
Well, that goes way, way back to some fundamental cultural ideas. Most ancient cultures, you look at the Greeks, Chinese, Indian traditions, they just didn't have a concept of creativity as this individual, novel human act.
So what was art then? What was making something?
It was seen mostly as a form of discovery or imitation. The thinking was that the universe was already ordered, right? It was governed by these eternal forms or principles. So the job of an artist or a craftsman was just to discover and reflect those truths that were already out there.
That actually sounds like it takes a lot of pressure off the artist.
It absolutely did. I mean, for the Greeks, the word poiein just meant to make. But when someone like Plato talked about it, he'd say a painter merely imitates. The artist wasn't creating the form from scratch. They were just copying an ideal, perfect form that already existed somewhere else. The creation wasn't really theirs.
And then Christianity came along and basically codified that idea on a cosmic scale.
It really did. The whole Western concept of creation comes from Genesis, right? Creation ex nihilo, out of nothing. That was God's domain and God's alone.
So humans could only, remix God's work?
Pretty much. Humans could only create as like an expression of God's work. This is where we get that powerful idea of an external genius or a demon, some external divine force that, mediated inspiration. If you wrote a brilliant poem, it wasn't because of your hard work.
It was the muse speaking through you.
Exactly. The muse was channeling through you,
yeah.
Which you can imagine creates a massive mental barrier for anyone trying to be original if the muse doesn't show up.
You can't work, and you can't force the muse to show up. So how did we break out of that? When did that start to shift?
The shift was revolutionary, and it's tied directly to the Renaissance and humanism. Suddenly, the focus started to shift to valuing the intellect and the achievement of the individual.
Right. You get figures like Leonardo da Vinci.
Exactly. People like da Vinci weren't just seen as empty vessels or conduits. They were seen as great men whose achievements were a result of their own intellectual power and their own discipline. That was the seed of the modern idea. But even then, the full secular concept that an individual could, through their own effort, produce something totally new and valuable, that didn't really solidify until after the Age of Enlightenment.
So by the time psychology gets around to formally studying this stuff in the 1950s, there's already this deep, culturally baked-in separation between inspired genius and, just regular work.
A profound separation. So when the modern psychological study of creativity really kicks off with J.P. Guilford in 1950, researchers, almost by default, define creativity as the opposite of routine.
How so?
Well, think about the work of E. Paul Torrance. He explicitly links creative action to situations where a person has no learned or practiced solution to a problem.
Okay, that sounds logical, but also really limiting. If you're following a known set of instructions, an algorithm, you aren't being creative.
Exactly. You're on an algorithmic path. It's structured, it's sequential. Creativity, by contrast, has to be a heuristic path, a flexible, non-algorithmic rule of thumb approach. And this focus on the heuristic just reinforced the idea that creativity is this rare, exceptional thing, a deliberate break from the norm.
And that idea was made even stronger by how they define the other side of the coin, habit.
Oh, absolutely. The psychological view of habit got, tragically narrow. Thanks in large part to behaviorism and figures like John B. Watson, habit was basically reduced to a simple, mindless, automatic reflex.
Like a dog salivating at a bell.
Exactly. A purely learned, non-conscious response. And if habit is just this fixed, mindless thing, then creativity must be the rare, brilliant spark that's totally disconnected from the vast majority of our lives.
So we basically convinced ourselves that most of our daily existence, all the stuff William James said is governed by habit, is just uncreative, automatic, and dull.
We did. We created this framework where if you're not trying something totally new and radical, you must be on autopilot. And that's the huge conceptual hurdle that so many professionals, especially in design and engineering, face today. They feel guilty for relying on structure, when in reality, that structure is the very engine of their breakthrough.
That structure, that reliable engine, that brings us right to what you could call the mastery paradox. The experience of a master craftsman or a great jazz musician or even a breakthrough engineer isn't about resisting habit, it's about leveraging it.
Right. The highest levels of creative performance are actually achieved within a deep habitual practice.
So we have to challenge that mindless assumption head on.
We absolutely do. And the best place to start is with the American pragmatist like John Dewey. He argued so forcefully against limiting the meaning of habit to just, repetition or mechanization. He said we had to protest that narrow definition.
So what was his alternative? What was a good habit to Dewey?
He argued that habit really means a kind of special sensitiveness or accessibility to things in your environment, and that it manifests will. He didn't see habits as these repetitive ruts. He saw them as arts, things involving skill, craft, and technique.
That makes so much sense. My failed morning ritual was this clumsy, forced attempt at an outcome. But my successful rush sprint the next morning, that was me leveraging the highly refined habit of writing and structuring arguments really, really quickly.
Exactly. Dewey pointed out that if your thought doesn't exist within those ordinary habits of action, the thought itself becomes clumsy, forced. Your mind and your body are out of sync with your knowledge base. So mastery then becomes the uppermost expression of habitual practice.
So they aren't opposed at all?
Not at all. When an action is so well practiced and internalized, when the habit is that strong, it's actually what enables the most advanced forms of creative expression. The two are linked on a continuum, and that continuum culminates in mastery.
The goal isn't just to automate things for the sake of it. It's to build a habitual foundation that's so sturdy you don't even have to think about the foundation anymore.
That is the crux of it. But, and this is a big but, the trick is defining what kind of practice actually gets you to that level of mastery. It can't just be mindless repetition.
This is where deliberate practice comes in.
This is K. Anders Ericsson's pivotal concept of deliberate practice. It's not just doing the same thing over and over. It involves constantly raising the difficulty and engaging in tasks that require this intense cycle of iterative refinement and problem solving.
Okay, can you walk us through the difference? Let's say I'm a professional data scientist. Just running the same model on a new data set every day isn't deliberate practice. So what is?
Deliberate practice would be actively seeking out projects that stretch your knowledge base. Maybe you have to integrate a new complex library you've never used. Or you're forced to debug these really novel conflicts that expose the limits of your current methods. It requires intense focus and, crucially, immediate feedback on what's working and what isn't. You have to keep pushing just beyond your comfort zone.
And that links directly back to this idea of cognitive bandwidth. Let's use that real-world example from the research, the Easter egg decorator.
Right, so you have this Eastern European craft tradition of decorating Easter eggs. It's incredibly intricate. And one artisan mentioned that to achieve true mastery, you had to work on at least 1,000 eggs.
1,000?
1,000 eggs. That kind of deep internalization of the patterns, the physics of the wax and the dye, the feel of the tool, that's what allows for what they call remarkable intuitive sensitivity.
So the repetition isn't the point. The perfection that comes from it is what frees up your mind.
Precisely. For that artisan, or for, say, a musician rehearsing complex cues for a performance, that deep practice frees them from having to consciously monitor their basic technical movements. They aren't thinking, am I holding the stylus right? Or is this the correct fingering for this chord?
All that is on autopilot.
It is. So their attention is freed up to focus entirely on the expressive goals and the aesthetic qualities. They can seize those little opportunities for personal creative touches, that spontaneous micro-adjustment of timing or color that turns a competent execution into a piece of art. It's the full integration of skill and expression.
And this is exactly why leading global corporations, especially in tech and R&D, implement structured daily creative routines. They know they can't just wait for some engineer to have a stroke of genius in the shower. They have to engineer the conditions for it.
Absolutely. When a major R&D department at, say, a big software company structures the work environment, the place to support deep, continuous, deliberate practice, they're basically cultivating a collective habitual base for the whole team.
They're automating the process of skilled searching, not the final answer.
Exactly. The stability of that process reduces things like decision fatigue. It allows the highest level engineers to focus all of their cognitive resources on the truly novel, difficult aspects of the product they're building.
This also supports that famous research on expertise, the 10-year rule. How should we think about that rule? Is it just 10 years of showing up, or is it 10 years of this deliberate kind of practice?
It's absolutely 10 years of deliberate, focused effort toward mastery within a specific domain. The research, which goes all the way back to Chase and Simon's work on chess masters, consistently shows that the big breakthroughs, the big C creative achievements, tend to happen about a decade after you've mastered the fundamental rules of your domain.
So you need that time.
You need that time to incorporate what are called the habits of vision and action, of your culture, of your discipline, of your craft.
So if you're a new architect, for example, you spend those first 10 years just absorbing everything, material physics, engineering constraints, historical styles, all the habits of the field until they're second nature.
Right.
And only then can you genuinely propose a design that is both novel and useful without accidentally violating the laws of physics.
That time allows for the development of these incredibly refined mental representations, which are absolutely necessary for planning and monitoring any kind of complex performance. And this idea integrates perfectly with the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu's concept of habitus.
Habitus, okay, that sounds very academic, but I feel like it has huge practical implications for how you build a long career. What exactly is it?
So habitus is not a fixed, rigid routine. It's better to think of it as an open system of dispositions. It's a framework of learned behaviors, perceptions, and judgments that you carry with you.
So it's a product of your history, your training, your culture, your experiences.
Right. But it's constantly producing new practices, which in turn create more history. And critically, it's always being affected by new experiences. It's not static.
So it's like a flexible, deeply learned infrastructure for how you act. But how is that creative?
Well, Bourdieu himself described habitus as an authentic art of inventing. He called it the feel for the game. It's that deep, intuitive understanding that allows for an infinite number of adaptive moves within a given set of social limits.
Ah, I see. So this is why a veteran professional, like a senior software architect, can instantly adapt when there's an unforeseen system failure or a sudden change in the project specs.
Exactly. Their response isn't just random brainstorming. It's a creative, adaptive move that's generated by this deeply ingrained yet totally flexible habitual system. They've internalized the rules of the game so deeply that they can instantly see all the possible moves and select the optimal novel solution for that specific moment.
That organizational angle and the idea of maximizing your adaptive moves, that brings us right into the biology of all this. It turns out that just grinding, that structured, deliberate practice, it isn't some failure of motivation. It's a profound strategic advantage that's rooted in how our brains are wired for efficiency.
Exactly. This is the neuroefficiency of practice.
So what's the core advantage?
The fundamental advantage of any habitual automatized performance is cognitive economy. Automating a skilled action frees up your mental resources. The research is very clear on this. Automatization allows you to take in more of the world and learn more.
Right. Once you stop having to consciously monitor the process, like the artisan with the egg, your conscious brain, your attention, is available for the big picture stuff. Abstract problem solving, planning, evaluating.
Exactly.
So where in the brain are these efficient, automated models actually being stored and run?
Well, the evidence points to the cerebellum. This region is just massive. It contains more neurons than the rest of the brain combined. Yeah. And we now understand its role is much, much broader than just coordinating movement.
Yeah.
The cerebellum seemed to adaptively model all the processes of our working memory to make them more efficient.
Okay, let's use an analogy here to make this really clear. Is the cerebellum kind of like my computer's cloud server? It's constantly handling all the background tasks and optimizations so that my main CPU, my conscious frontal lobe, is free to run the big, important programs.
That is a fantastic analogy. The cerebellum is the brain's massive parallel processing optimization engine. It takes all those repetitive, skilled actions, your deliberate practice, and develops these highly efficient predictive models of how those actions should be executed.
And then it just sends the shortcuts up to the creative centers.
Precisely. These optimized models of how working memory should work are fed back to the frontal lobes, which control working memory. And it's here, in the frontal lobes, that creative and innovative thoughts arise, especially divergent thinking, the ability to generate multiple, non-obvious solutions.
So by offloading all the efficiency work to the cerebellum,
the frontal lobes are free to engage in the higher-order combinatorial thinking that's necessary for any real breakthrough.
That explains perfectly why art and design academies have to integrate mandatory daily creative practice. They are literally conditioning their students' cerebellums to handle the technical load. The goal is to cultivate that long-term artistic mastery, completely independent of whether they feel inspired on a given Tuesday.
It's applied neuroscience as a teaching method. And when we look at the creative breakthrough itself, neuroscience shows us it's about the interaction of multiple brain networks. True creative innovation requires the co-activation and communication between regions of the brain that, under normal circumstances, are not strongly connected.
So your brain is making these new long-distance connections, but how does it make sure those connections aren't just, random noise? If I'm connecting distant ideas, how do I know I'm connecting useful ideas?
That's where the brain's internal filtering mechanisms come in. Studies show that the most creative solutions emerge when the brain is actively suppressing the obvious or known solutions.
So it's not just about generating more ideas, it's about filtering out the junk faster.
Yes. This suppression process seems to be mediated by things like alpha oscillations in the right temporal lobe and activity in the right frontal pole.
So when I'm staring at that blank page and some obvious cliche idea pops into my head, a highly creative brain is essentially sending out an alpha wave that says, nope, reject that default setting, keep digging, the good stuff is deeper.
That's a great way to put the internal dialogue.
Yeah.
It really suggests that creative genius isn't necessarily about having a bigger well of ideas to draw from, but maybe about having a much better internal filter and selection process that forces you past your first habitual but unoriginal answers.
This idea of an internal risk assessment, a filter, it sounds very economical. Which brings us to the neuroeconomic framework of creativity. How does the brain actually calculate the value of trying a new idea versus sticking with a known one?
Right. So this framework basically describes creativity as an optimization and utility maximization problem. At any given moment, Your brain has to determine the optimal balance between two processes, exploiting the ideas you already know and exploring for new ones.
Exploit versus explore. That is the classic strategic trade-off in so many fields, especially product development and software engineering.
How so?
Well, a team has to exploit its established code base, the known solution, to deliver features on time and on budget. But they also have to dedicate resources to explore radical new features or technologies if they want to stay competitive and innovative in the long run. It's a constant tension.
And that very tension is thought to be mediated in the brain by the locus coeruleus system. This system uses two different types of activity to govern how we approach processing information.
Okay, tell us about those two types of activity.
You have tonic activity and phasic activity. Phasic activity helps with exploitation. It facilitates the selection of existing ideas and helps you focus your attention on known goals. It's what's happening when you're just executing a well-defined task.
And tonic.
Tonic activity, on the other hand, facilitates exploration. It helps you generate new ideas when you're in a more diffuse, open search mode.
I see. So if a software engineering team gets stuck in deep exploitation mode, just cranking out minor patches and bug fixes, their manager needs to find a trigger to shift their collective locus coeruleus system into that exploratory tonic state to come up with the next big thing.
That is the perfect strategic application. If you want to encourage that tonic exploratory activity, you design meetings with really open-ended goals. Or you present problems where the information is deliberately scarce or confusing, which forces the brain into that diffuse search mode.
And if you want high-precision execution phasic mode,
you provide clear algorithmic steps and focused incentives. Leading corporations, whether it's in product design or R&D, are essentially managing this exploit-explore balance using structured tasks and routines. They recognize that even the explore phase requires a structured environment to manage the nervous system's efficiency.
That's the neuroscience behind why the structure of the day is so much more important than the inspiration of the moment. Okay, but let's talk about something we think of as purely spontaneous. Mood. Does mood still play a role in all this?
Oh, mood certainly influences your thinking style, but maybe not in the tortured artist way we imagine. Generally, positive affect, a positive mood, is found to support creativity.
How does it do that?
Alice Asen's research found a few key effects. First, it just makes more of your cognitive material available for association. Second, it leads to what's called defocused attention, which broadens the scope of what your brain considers relevant. And third, it just generally increases cognitive flexibility.
Defocused attention. That sounds exactly like what you need when you're trying to make those unusual connections linking things that don't obviously belong together.
It's the optimal state for that initial brainstorming phase, and the behavioral evidence for this is really strong. A positive mood tends to facilitate those flexible, rule-of-thumb, heuristic methods of thinking.
And a negative mood.
A negative mood tends to facilitate this more structured, step-by-step algorithmic methods.
So if I'm anxious or feeling down, my brain is actually primed for structure and steps. That's great for debugging code or reviewing a contract or writing a really tight logical argument.
Correct.
But if I need a radical new concept, that divergent thinking, I need to be in that positive, defocused, heuristic state.
Right. And the implication for fostering innovation is that you need routines that can accommodate both states. You need the stability and challenge that allows for algorithmic precision when you're executing. And you also need the psychological safety and positive environment that facilitates heuristic exploration during idea generation. A good routine allows for the intentional manipulation of your mood and focus, ensuring you dedicate time to both exploiting and exploring.
So we've made a really strong case that the most sophisticated forms of creativity depend on this deep, flexible base of habit. Now we need to unify all these ideas. Let's define 3 distinct but totally interconnected forms of creativity that show how novelty is constantly emerging from the routine.
And this is important. We're moving past the idea that habit and creativity are just, complementary phases. We're looking at their simultaneous presence in every moment of action.
Okay, so let's start with the base layer, the one that's usually invisible.
That would be habitual creativity. This is the intrinsic creativity that exists within our customary actions. It shows up as these tiny, constant adjustments we call microgenetic novelties.
I think this is the hardest one for people to grasp because it sounds a bit like we're just redefining routine as creative. How is just adjusting a habit a creative act?
Because the repeated performance of any skill is actually a recreation every single time. No 2 throws of a baseball are ever perfectly identical. No two surgeries are exactly the same. Even two lines of code are never written under the exact same system conditions.
So the expert is constantly subtly adjusting their practice skill to fit a dynamic, ever-changing context.
Exactly. They're combining routines, perfecting their practice on the fly. The moment a musician is performing on stage, they are engaging in habitual creativity. They're focusing on the expressive goals while their body unconsciously executes all the technical movements they practiced for years.
Which means that even the act of perfecting a practice, that process of continuous refinement, is an ongoing creative act.
The refinement is the novelty. Now, what happens when that flow gets interrupted? When the habit hits a wall because the context changes too drastically for a micro-adjustment.
That's the trigger for the next type.
That's the trigger for improvisational creativity.
Improvisation. We know it from jazz, from comedy. It's that spontaneous, on-the-spot response.
That's right. Improvisational creativity is triggered by an obstacle or difficulty that crops up in the course of habitual action. It requires you to interrupt the routine and deliberate. You improvise when your current habit just isn't working for the moment. It's a bridge across a discontinuity.
And the nature of that improvisation is basically making do with what you have on hand.
Yes. The anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss had a great term for this: bricolage. It's about making the best with what is at hand, while still staying within a framework of rules. It's been called rehearsed spontaneity, or planned serendipity.
Those oxymorons are perfect. Let's use a non-artistic example. An engineer in a high-pressure factory environment. A key machine fails, and the specific replacement part is weeks away.
That engineer has to practice bricolage. They rely on their deep habitual knowledge of the system's rules. How fast can this component run? What are the thermal limits? And they make the best with whatever unexpected off-the-shelf parts they can find in the supply closet to solve this urgent problem, probably in a tight budget.
So that solution is novel, it's useful, but it is fundamentally built on the scaffolding of their deep habitual knowledge of that machine.
The improvisational freedom is only possible against that well-defined backdrop of habit and rules.
So improvisation is reactive. It needs a problem or an obstacle to react to. But the third type, innovative creativity, that's proactive.
Correct. Innovative creativity is triggered by the conscious intention of the actor to generate a novel solution. It's problem formulation, not just problem solving. This is your big C achievement, the radical new scientific theory, the intentional market disruption.
This sounds a lot like Sternberg's investment theory.
It fits perfectly.
Right.
This is where creative people buy low. They propose these unique ideas that are initially rejected or ignored by everyone, and then they sell high, they leave the now valued idea to others, and move on to the next neglected area. That requires not just skill and habit, but the deliberate will and strategic choice to push against convention.
The critical point here, then, is understanding how these three forms, habitual, improvisational, and innovative, are not separate boxes. They're constantly nested inside each other.
They glide into one another constantly. Any big innovative act is always embedded within these habitual and improvisational fields of action. Let's go back to the artisan, the Easter egg maker. They start with a strong habitual practice. They have deep knowledge of materials, motifs, techniques, and they're constantly engaging in that microgenetic novelty, making tiny adjustments.
Then an obstacle appears. A customer demands a design they've never seen before, or wants to use a difficult new color of dye.
That requires improvisation. The artisan uses their existing tools and their practice movements, their bricolage, to meet that new, urgent request.
And when does that shift into large-scale innovation?
Innovation comes when the artisan has a conscious realization, like, wait a minute, this problem is coming up a lot and my existing tools just aren't good enough. I need a systemic change. So they invent a wholly new technique, like using wax and relief, or they start creating entirely new product lines like Christmas eggs, adapting their core habitual practice to a totally new market. That's proactive problem formulation.
And crucially, once that innovation is successful, it then becomes part of the new existing habitual practice, which is then subject to continuous reinterpretation and microadjustment by the whole community of artisans.
Exactly. The innovation only sticks if it can be successfully assimilated back into the habitual structure of the domain. It becomes the new, refined habit, which then provides the base for the next level of improvisation and innovation. The structure of habit makes the novelty of innovation possible, and innovation in turn continually refines the structure of habit.
So we come full circle. The foundation of high-level creative achievement is not some sudden divine spark. It's that ugly effectiveness built on a highly refined, flexible, and constantly perfected base of habitual action. That unglamorous 45 minutes of grinding, armed with automatic skills, is far more potent than hours spent waiting for a muse that might never show up.
The real genius isn't the person who avoids routine. It's the person who uses disciplined, deliberate practice to automate the basics. They're the ones who free up their cognitive resources, their cerebellum offloading working memory, so they can engage in those higher-level exploit versus explore challenges that result in true novelty.
So by revaluing habit, by seeing it as an intrinsically creative act, we shift the whole perspective away from the rare and the accidental. Creativity isn't this extraordinary thing reserved for a few geniuses. It's an ordinary existential dimension, a natural consequence of living and acting. And understanding that, well, that provides the very structure we need to actually reach its highest, most innovative forms.